Welcome to Solved, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers today are Amanda and Deon, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems. Today, we are going to solve the eternal problem of leftist infighting. Not a small task, but I think we can do it. And I think we're going to be drawing on our knowledge and experience of the last at least 10 to 15 years and having watched the changing culture around how politics is debated, how racial and gender and economic justice are discussed on the left, I was surprised to come across a couple of ideas that were new to me that I think have healthy critiques of how things have been going, with some pointers in the direction of where we need to move. So I think it's going to be good and refreshing for everyone. We start with the article, "The Left Needs to Learn the Difference Between Imperfect Allies and Our True Opponents." This is probably the widest angle, the biggest perspective, the thing that comes up the most, the eternal problem of criticizing those on the left who are not sufficiently on the left or sufficiently ideologically pure, or whose actions do not sufficiently match ideology and so forth. So the article lays it out this way. It says, quote, "The capitalist class, corporate media, and reactionary political structures do not waste their time in self-destructive squabbles. They understand their interests and act accordingly. They do not expect perfection from their allies. They expect sustained commitment. Meanwhile, the left, often fragmented, consumed by internecine conflict, directs its energies toward devouring itself, serving the very interests it claims to oppose." End quote. And, he goes on to describe, I mean, it's about Bernie Sanders in particular, and it's describing hate that Bernie receives from the left. And I have heard versions of this for years. The one that goes back the furthest was in the wake of 2016. I learned the term sheepdogging, and it was the leftist critique of Bernie Sanders for having dared to endorse Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump after Bernie Sanders had
Okay.
lost the primary election to Clinton. And the idea of sheepdogging is that he ran an extremely progressive campaign, excited and energized huge swaths of the left that had previously been sort of dormant, and then sheepdogged them, corralled them into the Democratic Party where their energies could go to die. And so that's one example. You could agree or disagree with that. You can sort of see their point and still ultimately disagree. But what it comes down to, this is how the article describes it. It says, quote, "Ultimately, it's because he's not perfect. He compromises. He operates within a system built to suppress radical change, and at times he makes decisions that fall short of expectations," end quote. And all of that is true, but I think the point is to zoom out and then figure out, like, what's the alternative, right? And is there an alternative that has a better chance than what Bernie Sanders did? And the conclusion I came to is, like, there's no need to defend every action of someone like Bernie Sanders. You could, like, agree generally. You could say, like, where he's headed, I generally agree. That doesn't mean you have to agree with everything he's done or defend every action. It's actually better to pull back a little, zoom out, and recognize that everyone needs to be accepting of imperfection and defend people on that basis. So I might not defend everything Bernie Sanders has ever done, but I will defend him as being imperfect in a way that we need to accept as people on the left, because not accepting it is the path to absolute isolation and fragmentation and ineffectiveness. So that's where we're starting.
So you're making me think of something Zohran Mandami said recently in the primary campaign for New York City mayor. He talked about talking to voters about that very thing, that you're not going to agree with me on everything. We probably agree on most things, but there's gonna be some stuff we don't agree on, but, like, that's fine. That's okay. We can still make a lot of progress together. We can still do good things for people, even if we don't agree on every little thing. And saying that out loud is really important because he is going to anger people, he's gonna mess up. Everyone does. That is how it goes. And if you have a purity test that is so severe that the second someone bothers you, disappoints you, says the wrong thing, you say, "That's it, I'm done," then you are part of the destruction of any progress we are maybe going to make. I see it all the time. I mean, the online discourse for this is vicious. And that's a bad environment to have these conversations anyway, but you're gonna agree with someone most of the time who falls in your political category, not all the time. Some things there's gonna be a disagreement that is a fundamental issue that maybe you can't get past, and other times it's gonna be a squabble over something that really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. How do we work in coalitions? Coalitions is how you move forward. We're gonna talk about Maurice Mitchell later on in the show, and he said something after the election that stuck with me very profoundly. He said, "If you don't have the stomach to be in coalition with people you disagree with, this isn't gonna be good for you. Get comfortable being around people you disagree with." That's where we are.
I think Zoran is like the central figure in this entire episode. He hits so many of the boxes that we're about to talk about. And I've seen the attacks from the right coming, but I've also seen people on the left already talking about, well,
Yeah.
I mean, he's probably just like Obama and blah, blah, blah. Like the cynicism is so
Mhm.
strong with the left, and probably rightfully so. Like
Sure.
we have
Well earned.
rarely,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
we have had so few victories and we've had so few people that either kind of tried to stick up to their promises or even remotely completed any of them. So I get the cynicism. However, if you're thinking from like just a regular person's perspective, someone who wants to be a senator, someone who wants to be a mayor, someone who wants to be president, you're already not like them at all, most likely. The average human being does not want to be mayor, governor, senator, president, etc. That's just not where we're at. So those people serve a function that the vast majority of us can't, don't want to, and never will. So we're already not going to agree. Like that thing you said, Amanda, he's using it kind of like a quote from a former mayor, and I can't remember what the other
Yeah,
part
I
was, but
know.
he
I
said,
could.
if you agree with me 100% of the time, seek help.
Yeah.
Like no
Yeah, like it's
one
not
agrees with
normal.
everyone 100% of the time. That's not healthy. It's not right. And it's not sane, honestly. So we've got to figure out a way to stop just trashing people probably doing their best, honestly. The
Mhm.
system is set up against people in the squad. It's set up against Bernie Sanders. So they're probably doing their best. And we cannot expect miracles from these people.
Right.
Absolutely not. And I think the way to frame that argument is not to like, don't tap into your empathy. Don't try to understand the failings of other people. Just think about what actually works. If that's what you care about making progress, you care about winning in some shape or form,
Mhm.
it requires being forgiving of people for their failings. So it's not because you're a nice person, it's because you can be as hard nosed as you want, and that is still the right thing to do. The article sort of sums it up saying, quote, wisdom is knowing the difference between imperfect allies and our true opponents. We need strength in numbers, not saviors. A serious political movement does not prioritize purity over power, end quote. So what should we then do? You may ask. And this article also provides a nice little listicle at the end with some key takeaways. Number one, imperfect allies aren't enemies. Straightforward. Number two, critique to build, not tear down. So it is still important to critique. It's not like, well, in order to not have infighting, we can't disagree. That doesn't make sense. But critiques of allies can be made while still respecting and appreciating their larger contributions to the movement, but understanding that if a critique doesn't help move us forward, then it is just fueling infighting. Number 3, organize, don't just argue, on that same point.
On number 3, I mean, I'm all for conversations and dialogue, but we also need to remember that the internet is a terrible place to have these conversations. I mentioned that before because it's manufactured to make conversations shitty. So what I really wanted to emphasize with that point is find in-person political groups. Find places where you can have discussions in person because we can't do it in this garbage dump that we've created on the internet. Like those actual conversations need to happen in person. And then just like, try not to be an asshole, like try to be open to different perspectives and trying to move people or, learn more about the issue. If I had a dime for every time I saw a comment about a mediocre social media post or a meme from someone on the left, and then a bunch of people threatening to unfollow them or that they're done with them forever, and I'd be rich. That happens all the time. And I recognize it as a symptom of disempowerment. But before you unfollow, disconnect, cancel your membership, etc., try to remember that you're going to disagree with the people you agree with most of the time. It is bound to happen. I certainly do. There are probably people who disagree with us right now listening to this show. Like, that is all right.
Not right now.
Hopefully not right now, but maybe.
If we're saying that you're bound to disagree with people and someone's like, that's not true, then they've just proven themselves wrong.
Yeah. But you just got to remember it's about the ideas, not individual saviors or people. And like, we have to talk to each other through those ideas. That is how we make progress.
Exactly. Which brings us straight to number 4, movements win, not individuals. Political victories come from collective power, not ideological purity. Number 5, perfection is the enemy of progress, which gets to the point of so much infighting being about purity or trying to perfect our arguments or our plan. And that in itself leads to delay to the point where almost nothing ever happens. Number 6, ego kills movements. Prioritizing personal status, ideological superiority, or being right over winning collective battles is a fast track to irrelevance. Number 7, play the long game. This may be hard to do in the moment when you're having a discussion, but keeping an eye on the horizon. It says the left must think beyond the next election cycle and invest in long-term power. Number 8, meet people where they are. This is about communication with non-activists. Effective communication reaches beyond activists and actually connects with people who are not as plugged into politics as you might be. Number 9, politics doesn't care about feelings. And it says the ruling class doesn't care if you're morally outraged. It only cares if you're organized enough to challenge its control. And again, that should help bring clarity to how we spend our time, where we put our focus, because expressing moral outrage without building power to challenge that which you are opposing is completely ineffective. And honestly, the power structures are happy for you to spin your wheels about how outraged you are if you are not connecting that to power building. Number 10, division is a weapon. Don't play along. Sort of what I'm getting at. The ruling class doesn't need to destroy the left if we're going to do it to ourselves with infighting. Number 11, don't self-marginalize. This is how the left tends to condemn the idea of pursuing power. And we've had conversations about this in the past, and I sort of get the instinct that power and the idea of power being corrupting and corruption being so much at the core of what is wrong with our politics. You can then see how like people might shy away from like power, that's not what we're about. We're on the outside. We're like maintaining our righteous purity and shouting from the outside, like sort of feels better, but actually having power is the way to make real change. And that should be clear to everyone. Number 12, build bridges, not walls. Dismissing political allies because they aren't perfectly aligned weakens movements. Broad coalitions win, ideological purity tests lose. I'm starting to see a theme here. And then the last one is to use every tool available. It says the left can't afford to sit out, it has to compete. The far right organizes to take power regardless of how corrupt the system currently is. So that's how you do it.
He's a horrible human, and I hate to bring him up and make anyone think about him, but I'm going to use Ted Cruz as an example. Everyone hates Ted Cruz. No one likes Ted Cruz. But Ted Cruz keeps winning elections because the power structure behind the Republican Party funds him to put him in that position and keep him in that position. Because they like him? Hell no. They hate him too. They all hate him. But he serves a purpose for the movement. He helps push whatever their project is along. That's what he does. We have people that are less hateable than Ted Cruz that we push away because we don't think they're good people or whatever. Like going back to what happened with Al Franken. Al Franken made a mistake. He did something inappropriate, wrong, and apologized for it. And instead of now being a senator who is fighting back, he's just a podcaster just like us. He's out of any semblance of power because he did something that we disagreed with. And maybe this is a bad example because maybe some people thought it was such a horrible thing that he shouldn't be a part of the Senate anymore, but he's not. And now we don't have someone who could be doing something in a position of power. Like, is what he did worth him not being a senator? If it is, then yeah, we move on, we find somebody else. But if it's not, and he apologizes and he can be used as a tool in a broader movement, then maybe that wasn't the right move. I think that kind of discussion is the kind of discussion that we're having here about who are really our allies. I think Al Franken is still an ally, right? And as hateable as Ted Cruz is to everyone, including everyone on the right, he's definitely an ally to the right, and they are never going to boot him, no matter what he does.
I think it's an interesting conversation because I was definitely thinking much more about political opinions or political misstatements and not necessarily personal actions. That does feel different to me. That is a very complicated case, I feel like, so it's hard for it to be a cut and dry example, but I'm more thinking about what this article was written about was Bernie Sanders said something that didn't sound as unified against the war in Gaza as people thought, which is like a nuanced, subtle difference that people get irate about. Like, that's the kind of stuff that came to mind for me when we were reading this. And that's what's so frustrating about it, because it's like, these are people you generally agree with, but expect that at some point there is going to be something that they say, do, believe, whatever, that is not great. Like, I'm hoping some people look at Kristen Gillibrand differently after her comments about Zohran Mandami. That was wildly inappropriate. Does that mean that she's not still going to be part of the Democratic coalition that helps maybe fight against Trump? Like, no, but should she be primaried? Maybe. I think that's the other conversation, is like, there's probably a limit to which you want to say, I'm still on board. And we have tools to do something in that case, which is primarying. And we should probably use that more effectively than we do.
I think that should she be primaried? Absolutely, 100%. I think everyone should be primaried. I think that's a good way to keep everyone in some sort of accountability mode, because once you become a senator, your primary opponents are non-existent or cannot compete anymore, then you don't have any motivation to actually be accountable to your base. So
Yeah.
they all should be primaried. Bernie should be primaried. Everyone should be primaried every time around. Like, we've talked about this several times on this show, that primaries make the Democratic Party democratic. Every single person, every election cycle is up for election, and you have to prove why you still should be the one making the vote out of 100 people or one of 435 people every single time around.
Yeah, I was reminded recently that it goes all the way back to Howard Dean referring to the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party back in, would that have been the 2024 election.
Sounds right.
So yeah, this has been a problem for a long time.
Yeah. As we wrap up this list and everything, I did come up with one little analogy. If you throw out all your bananas the second they get a bruise, then you're left with no bananas and a bunch of unnecessary waste. So people need to be bruised a little bit and we need to still move forward. But then we have other, if they're too bruised, we have other tools at our disposal to, shake things up and get some new people in the mix.
And bruised bananas make delicious banana bread. So there's still a
Oh,
purpose for 'em.
you took the words out of my mouth.
I almost said that, but I thought I was stretching the analogy too far, but maybe no.
I don't even know what that analogy means anymore, but I would like some banana bread.
Great. Awesome.
Next up, the conversation sort of pivots to a little bit of analysis of how we've gotten here. Now, to be clear, the left always fights within itself, always, 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 and we should just understand that as the baseline of existing within the left. And so there's not a future we are hoping for in which internal disagreements stop, but how the debate looks precisely right now, how it could be improved, I think are worthwhile efforts. And so we're going to talk, not with too many quotes because this is from a video, but we watched a bit of America Has No Left Wing, an interview between Adam Conniver and NYU Professor Vivek Chibber. And some of this was actually used on Best of Left recently, anywhere you get your podcasts. And Vivek Chibber sort of comes from the socialist perspective, definitely critiquing the left from the economic socialist left, and gets into critiques of the way I think he would argue he's not critiquing the ideas of racial and gender justice, those sorts of things, but critiquing some of the ways those debates have been had in recent years. And I think a major problem for the left is that there are so many bad faith critiques of the left, particularly when it comes to things like race and gender, that it is genuinely difficult to sort through and parse out worthy critiques versus the absolute ocean of unworthy critiques. Actually, like racism and patriarchy and misogyny cloaked in some sort of critique of the way the left is approaching anti-racism, trying to argue that we're doing it wrong, or that the best path forward is colorblindness or whatever, that sort of lead into dead ends or perpetuating the status quo. And I think that Vivek Chibber does have some critiques that are worthwhile. They're like the needle in the haystack. So going back quite a ways, he talked about how as unions and labor interests lost power through the 70s and 80s, that the core of the left shifted to be within universities. He's like, look, universities have always been super important to the left, but usually people would they'd be in a university and they'd get sent out, go be an activist in the movement, go out, join, labor unions, be an activist on the ground in the places where the left is needed, where organization is needed. And he was arguing that as the sources of power outside of universities were suppressed, that the left ended up retreating to be almost exclusively within universities, and that the movement began to take on the culture of universities writ large. And that is just what the left sort of became. And so there's like a lot of debate and a lot of infighting and a lot of like jostling for position, because that's what universities are for. That's fine. They can be the incubator of ideas. But if those ideas don't have anywhere to go, there's no outlet for that energy, then the debate becomes infighting and it just stays that way. And this is sort of a parallel idea. Like, it's framed in a new way that I hadn't thought of before, but it's very much a parallel idea to something I do talk about a fair amount, which is during that same period, as economic progress started being blocked. And there's a lot of reasons for it. And you go back to the Powell memo and the Supreme Court, and corporations really got their acts together and decided to push back against the New Deal. Economic progress from the left really was stymied. And that led people to sort of pivot at that point to where they could be impactful, which was social issues. So there was a pivot away from economic progress to LGBTQ rights. That is just sort of the nature of how political energy flows. It flows to where it can be effective. So if you're stuck in a place like a university without the ability to be sent out and have left wing ideas be concretely impactful, then that energy just flows toward infighting. And you can be like, well, I can't start up a union, but I can make sure my compatriot here, who's like a very small amount wrong, understands they're wrong and gets more correct. And so our vision shrank as our opportunities to make change shrank. Our vision of how we should spend our energy shrank along with it. That's the argument.
I mean, I thought it was an interesting assessment. It's very cynical, and I probably wouldn't apply it as broadly as Professor Chibber did, but he said that the left attracts a frustrated upper middle class people by saying, "Hey, are you unhappy? Capitalism is making you unhappy." And he says, "A broken left attracts broken people." I found that like pretty severely cynical, but there's probably some truth to it. I think it's probably, in my opinion, more just the fact that we're a big tent party and always have been, for, well, at least in more recent memory. And that's probably part of that more so. But it definitely, what I think he nailed is that the upper class left has defined the issues we care about and how we talk about them more so than they should be. Like, they should not wield the power they do in our political sphere.
I think, whether you think he was cynical or not, then I tend to agree with Amanda that, again, it's a person that I don't 100% agree with. I think his critique is rooted in something that we're actually seeing the effects of right now. When we kind of turn focus to identity and gender and racial issues, it was a lot easier to counter, and we're seeing it right now. There's a counter in the culture to that kind of idea, and it is being pushed culturally. We are losing a culture war as opposed to fighting this economic war. And I think a lot of that has to do with because the left, as he described, is mainly in these elite institutions. They have a financial interest that people in labor unions don't necessarily have. So that's an automatic point for conflict. And they see less reason to criticize capitalism writ large because
Mhm.
if you went to an elite college, you're going to get a good job, most likely. You're going to get paid well. So you don't necessarily want to attack that part because, on a personal level, it is good for you. As that group, it is good for them. I live in a state, Missouri, that is all red all the time now. And that just wasn't the case years ago. There were
Mhm.
Democratic senators, Democratic governors. Our state house was majority Democrat not that long ago, in my lifetime. I'm in my 40s.
Mhm.
And that stuff has all shifted as the idea of what left is has shifted more into identity and culture as opposed to class and, material conditions. And I think this moment is a great time to see that some of the victories that were won in the realm of identity, gender, were a lot more shallow than maybe we thought they were because they seem to be getting taken down a
Mhm.
lot easier than a strong coalition of people who have a financial connection together.
Right.
And that's the part that we're going to have to get over because a lot of people that you work with are not going to agree with you on a lot of these things. But as Fox News showed recently, the big beautiful bullshit bill,
Mhm.
when it is discussed in a way that is honest about its parts and what it's going to do, even 50% plus of Fox viewers think it's bad. Those are the kinds of things that the left absolutely can win on because they have better ideas for the vast majority of people. And not to say that we should just run away from trans issues, gay rights, racial, gender issues. That is not what is being said here. He might have said that. I think he kind of did in the video.
A little bit.
But the foundation should be class, financial issues, material conditions.
Quick note on Missouri being the bellwether state. I'd always heard that, but just looked it up because I didn't know the actual history of it. There's a whole Wikipedia page. It says the Missouri bellwether was a political phenomenon,
Was.
that noted that the state of Missouri voted for the winner in all but one US presidential election for 100 years from 1904
Yeah.
to 2004. So
Yep.
2008 broke that mold. I wonder what was different about 2008 that would have made that go differently.
There's no way to tell. Well, there's no way to
Right.
know.
No. And it says the one exception was 1956. I feel like Chibber walked this line where, like, I kept hearing these red flags of like, wait, are we going to ignore the important things we've been learning in the last 10 or 15
Mhm.
years for political expediency, or because we need to focus on economics instead? But he would also say enough things to argue that that wasn't what he was saying. And like, this is
Right.
why these debates are difficult. But he brings up the George Floyd uprising happening at the same time as the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign, and argued that those two forces, had they managed to combine, would have been almost the perfect recipe for exactly what America needs right now. The combining of racial and economic justice movements. I mean, that's what Martin Luther King Jr. was killed over, right? Like, that's exactly
Yeah.
it. That's always been the sweet spot that I've been aiming for, right? I'm just like, let's just do both. Why are we debating about which one we do? Can we please do both? And what Chibber argues is that elites, I think both political and corporate, responded to the George Floyd uprisings with, I mean, like, they came on board rhetorically. They're like, oh, like, we agree, this is terrible, something needs to be done. But they focused on things like discrimination and programs designed for the advancement of people of color within the current system. So there was no talk of broad transformation of economic, housing, affordable community college, healthcare systems, like the things that
Yeah.
those in, I mean, everyone would benefit from that. And the worse off you are in this country, the more you would benefit from those things. So that is sort of the socialist structural argument for a focus on economics, is like, look, if you want to help Black people, help build the systems that help everyone, and that will disproportionately help Black people. And so the intersectional left, the ones who sort of talk about race and gender dynamics a lot and understand the connections between them, I think their critique of the socialist left, and I sort of put myself in this category broadly, is that the socialist left imagines that socialism will solve all the problems. So let's just talk about that. But Chibber brings in this counter critique, which I appreciated, which is the socialist critique of the political and corporate elites' approach to social issues, which is to artificially narrow the discussion of racial justice and other social issues to kind of explicitly exclude economic approaches that would help the broad base. So approaches like DEI claim to help people of color economically, but it's kind of narrowly focused on upwardly mobile relative elites, people in academia or corporations with salaries, not the broad base of working class people getting paid by the hour. So that's an interesting counter critique, which, I mean, it sort of hardens my resolve of like, right, both, always,
Mhm.
both.
Yeah.
Like, that is clearly the answer. And I think that Chibber was coming at it, like, agreeing with that, agreeing that, yeah, it's both. Of course, it's both.
I think in how he's explaining this, what he kept leaning on was, well, the socialist movement has been the leaders of all of the social justice movements of the last century. So he dismisses that critique out of hand. I think that's incorrect. I think that he can't just lean on the last 100 years and assume that people will understand, oh, these are people who totally get it. And, like, because that's our politics is shifting. And the way people talk about things now is not a given.
Welcome back. After multiple catastrophic technical failures, 24 hours has passed for us since our past recording session, which means that Erin has now been able to join us. Erin, give the people a greeting.
Hello.
Oh, wow. Going a different route. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, this is a different event. It feels like it calls for something different.
Yeah, everything's different. I agree. And as we crashed into the technical abyss, Amanda was speaking and has more thoughts.
So, yeah, I'm not going to quote this verbatim. Generally, he was speaking about how the elites, upper class, minorities in the upper class, they don't have a problem with their position in the class structure. They're just fighting for the full returns of their position in the class structure, is what he was saying. And he said that for a working class woman or working class person of color, if you take away discrimination, they're still screwed. So their battle is not against discrimination, it's for jobs themselves, it's for social services. That was generally quoting. And I guess I just wouldn't say it that way because, as we were saying, it's both. It certainly is both. And if you took away the other struggles, there would be racism. And I think the argument that gets made is that the economic fixes will fix everything else. That is often what you hear. And I definitely think like it might help society at large to not have an underclass of millions of struggling people that elites can manipulate and exploit and pit against each other. It definitely would be better to not have a billionaire class that controls our politics and therefore our destinies. All of that would absolutely like ease problems in society, which may also ease racism. But I don't ever think we can act like it's only one thing at a time or it's not all completely connected to each other. Like, I'm thinking of a working class person who maybe is getting a decent wage, but then doesn't get raises or doesn't get promoted or is, treated less than other workers in the workplace. Like, that stuff is happening. And so they're not only dealing with economic strife, they're also dealing with racism. So trying to parse this out feels kind of unproductive to me, even though we might be able to make a lot of progress by focusing on certain policy issues that are not just about racism. Like racial justice is all of the above to me. And I kind of thought that was the idea that we're working toward economic gains for everyone, but especially those who are being put down in the system and oppressed in the system, and making sure that they are not being discriminated against is part of that. So I just think it's interesting when he starts parsing things out like this. I'm just like, why are we doing this? Why can't we go forth with both visions in mind?
I think his main point that he kept trying to get to, and I agree with to an extent, is that what was being done on the racial and identity and gender front was strictly superficial. And
Mhm.
to an extent, I think there's a recency bias. What he's thinking about is what happened after 2020, like DEI programs and like the NFL putting in racism on the back of their helmets and like the kente cloth kneeling, all that stuff was just performative and nonsense. But
Right.
real structural change that I think he's connecting financially to the New Deal era. They've been trying to tear that down for a very long time. They're getting really close as we're recording. They're getting really, really close to tearing that down.
Mhm.
But along that line, the civil rights movement, like it made some real improvements in people's lives. Didn't go far enough. Still work needs to be done. But the stuff in the Civil Rights Act, they've had a difficult time repealing all that too. They've had a lot of workarounds, and it's easier for them to work around stuff like that because America, like the waters were swimming in racism. Like that's what this country is. So I get what he's saying. Maybe like it's kind of a workaround. Just focus on economics, but that doesn't change things. If you did make that black worker who's making minimum wage, now they're making a living wage. Well, now they're still dealing with the racism too. Like that part didn't go away
Right.
because they got
That's what
a
I
better
mean.
job.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, they'll also have the double whammy of, well, you only got that because we did this for you part. So it's a double-edged sword. It's always going to be that way. And I think maybe the Democratic Party, as constructed, tries to go for easy wins as opposed to the deeper structural change. And I think maybe that's his overall message, that overall structural change is the priority. But I don't think you can divorce the financial from the identity at all. Like maybe don't put the identity part forward, but you can't shelve it completely.
Yeah, no, I just want to reiterate what I think was the most salient point already made. I think Amanda was the one saying that Chibber seems to be putting so much stock in the fact that those who fought against racism and sexism before were generally socialists, that that somehow translates automatically to almost like we don't need to worry about it that much because the socialist, like we got you.
Yeah.
We socialists who are focused on the economics, like we got you. Socialists are already doing that. We already know about that stuff. So we don't need to have like specialists focusing on it or specific conversations focused on social dynamics and discrimination and those sorts of things that we all agree need to be discussed in combination with economic solutions. And what Amanda said was like, so much has changed. He was making references to 50 years ago as if we haven't had leaps and bounds of progress in understanding of social dynamics and discrimination dynamics and how racism works and functions and embeds itself in society. It's just like everything else in society, specialization. No one knows everything they need to know about everything. Of course, we need specialists who are focusing on different aspects of this and coalitions to bring all those ideas together. And he does just seem dismissive in multiple instances. It was a long discussion and we didn't watch the whole thing, but I did. And I think it was maybe a different part of the discussion where he talks about how everyone comes to these discussions from their own position in the world, their class position, their position in the workforce, and that their position really colors how they see things. And so he was pointing out that people like him, people in the professional class who want to be socialist, for instance, are then working against their own economic interests in a sense. And this was part of a broader discussion about how organizations that really want to attract working class people need to be aligned with the interests of working class people and so on. But what I realized within the last 24 hours after we stopped recording was that he makes this great point about how everyone's perspective is colored by their position. And he doesn't seem to recognize that in himself. He doesn't seem to recognize how deeply academic he sounds and how academic theory doesn't always map perfectly onto real life experience when you're trying to have a conversation. So when in multiple instances in this interview, he's like very dismissive of concerns about, okay, how do we translate this to the real world? How do we have this conversation in the real world? And he's just like, just don't worry about it. It's easy. I don't even see what the problem is. And it's like so cut and dried, so dismissive that it's like, right, theory can be that easy. Getting into the messiness of having conversations with people is just more complicated. And so his dismissiveness of the aspects of this conversation that are not his expertise just kind of fits in that frame as well. It's like he's focused on the academics of studying economic movements and left wing political movements, how they build and how they form. And so he's got a lot of great things to bring to the table, but then is overly dismissive of those things that he is not an expert in.
He's also not taking into account perception. I mean, Bernie bros became a thing, and the perception of a Bernie bro was someone who only cared about economics and not race or gender or any of those other social issues. And so the non academic perception of Bernie bros is that they're like leftist socialists, but who don't care about those other things. And so if he's not taking that into account, then like he's not going to make the best argument broadly.
I think like we all are in agreement that when you center the most marginalized among us, life gets better for all of us. I think messaging has like parsed through a lot of people and kind of created these classes where they don't see how connected they are, right? So, for example, I was at a protest, and one of the big messaging things that I disagreed with was they were calling out white women for voting for Trump and Hispanic men for voting for Trump. And while I didn't like disagree with that being a conversation, to me, when we frame arguments like that, we're framing them as if working class white men weren't voting against their own interests. And so I think in doing that, like you're kind of parsing through people that you could agree with. But where I like do not find a compelling argument is dropping race, because what I think is missing is how people see, again, that marginalized person being centered, how it's going to make their life better too, how fighting for other people's rights. Like, I think it's a failure of messaging that in centering other people, others feel like that
Like it's pie.
doesn't impact them in like a positive way. Yeah. So to me, I see a lot of messaging mistakes because, like, in reality, the world that we're building is good for 1% of the population. And like, when you look at wealth disparity, I'm not crying for millionaires. But I do think that there's something to be said about like millionaires are not the same as billionaires. They're not seeing the same benefits. Now, they benefit way more than other classes of people. Absolutely. And we can have that discussion. I'm not even saying they got there ethically, but I do think that there are a lot of people who get into a different class and they view themselves as like disconnected from the other issues. Like, well, you know, I'm not working class. I'm not, you know, lower middle class. So those don't necessarily impact me. And like, of course they do. Of course this impacts us. And of course, again, if we do certain things, like one, even if you don't financially benefit, because I know that's the big thing, right? Like, am I going to financially benefit from it? Even if you don't financially benefit from it, like there is a social contract that has been deteriorating. And like, it is hard to live in a world where you see people unhoused on the street. It's hard to see that and like tap into your empathy and not find yourself having the compassion that you should. Material things can be hard within your community. And when you invest in those, like it makes your community safer, better, stronger. And like, I do think that there's people who they're not making those connections.
Yeah.
And like, that is up to us because those are definitely people that we could be in coalition with.
Erin, as you were speaking, all I could think about was the Medicaid cuts. Like people don't understand that Medicaid cuts will impact their local community hospitals, the emergency rooms, like all of those things. You will end up paying for it one way or the other. You're really concerned about that. Like this is all, we are all connected. As we always say on the show, we are all connected.
And if we decide to not discuss race at all, that's not going to stop the right from using race explicitly as a wedge issue to do all the horrible things they're doing. That's what they're doing right now.
Great point.
We brought up Jason Pargin earlier in the show, which was from the before times yesterday for us. But he put out something that was really interesting, talking about prison population. There's a thing going on right now where prison populations are declining rapidly because people don't commit crimes the same rate. For who knows what the reasons are, could be a myriad of reasons. But prisons that are largely private are emptying out and aren't making as much money. And now, all of a sudden, we have what Laura Loomer said yesterday in a tweet, 65 million illegal. And what she's really talking about is 65 million Hispanic people. All of them, not illegal, not legal residents. She wasn't making a distinction. That's 65 million Hispanic people in the country. And those people will now be new products for prisons. And that is what's going to be used for many, many different things. They're using it as an excuse for the Medicare cuts because there's all these illegal immigrants using this subsidy. So where the fraud and the waste that they're talking about cutting is doing something that's not real in the first place. Because if you are not a legal resident, you can't get those services. But that's what they're saying they're doing it for. So they're going to continue to use it. So we don't get to just ignore it because they're not going to.
So to wrap up the Chibber discussion section of the show, I just want to point out what a good job we're doing with this conversation, because I realized that we are critiquing Chibber in exactly the way that the first article today suggested that we do. Like appreciating his contributions. He had lots of good and interesting things to say.
Mhm.
We're critiquing in a way that we hope like builds an understanding that pushes us forward with a good strategy to combine all the best ideas of the socialist left and the, intersectional identitarian left. But also, unfortunately, I was reminded because I got an email yesterday from the company that makes our editing software. It has all kinds of fancy like AI features. And so they were touting their new features, one of which is that it can, automatically find like little segments from within a bigger show to turn into social video posts. And the way they suggested using it was to tell the app to find a series of short clips of moments of conflict within the show, because they know that those are the clips that people post on social media, which reminded me that we're having our conversation entirely wrong. And so I just wanted to say that Vivek Chibber is an idiot. He's an enemy to the movement. He's dead to me. And if you disagree, then you're an idiot too.
Be sure to clip that out.
Click on that and then go back and watch the whole show where we don't believe that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I thought it was going to get more personal. I was like, oh, don't pick me.
Next up, we're continuing the discussion on how to have discussions, and we're continuing to talk about race in a way that I, as a white person who's been paying attention to this stuff for 15 years, found like clarifying in one of those ways that you're like, I'm annoyed that this was clarifying because I feel like this should have been clear before, but it wasn't, and that's why it needed to be said. So Maurice Mitchell is the head of the Working Families Party, wrote an essay a couple of years ago, and it made a bit of a splash, particularly in the organized left, the organizations. And it was written in response to a phenomenon of left-wing organizations like genuinely struggling to manage their missions because of internal strife. And so it got complicated and messy, and we're only picking at one of the threads of this very multifaceted conversation because Maurice Mitchell wrote something very clarifying, as I said. So he talks about a concept that he refers to as neoliberal identity. I don't know if he coined that term, but that's how he refers to it. And he explains it this way. He says, quote, using one's identity or personal experience as a justification for a political position, you may hear someone argue, as a working class first generation American Southern woman, I say we have to vote no. What's implied is that one's identity is a comprehensive validator of one's political strategy. That identity is evidence of some intrinsic ideological or strategic legitimacy. Marginalized identity is deployed as a conveyor of a strategic truth that must simply be accepted, end quote. And he also explains that identity and lived experiences are important for understanding, but they just shouldn't be thought of as conversation stoppers. And I gotta say, like, this has been a tricky one because there's been a lot of talk in the past decade and a half about white people kind of needing to shut up and just listen to people of color for a while, at least, right? And to me, coming into these conversations and listening, like, it felt very valid. I was like, no, I think that's right. I think I don't know as much and should listen and learn. But also there's like a seed of discomfort there because you kind of know like that dynamic can't continue indefinitely. Like we can't have people who feel like it's their job to remain silent in a coalition or community or debate or whatever, and other people whose positions are taken for granted to be valid and correct. Because that, if it turns out they're not correct, but they're not questioned, then we don't have to explain how that can lead to problematic outcomes. So this clarification is trying to lead interracial and intra-left discussions in a better and healthier direction. And I would say, like, maybe the timing of it is right, and maybe white people did need to sit back and listen and learn for like a decade. And maybe the timing of this essay coming, I think, came out in about 2022, was like, okay, like it's time for everyone to get back engaged.
I would say not everyone. I think some people need to shut the fuck up and listen for a little bit longer. But
Fair.
like the way that as a XYZ person, I say we should vote no, what instantly triggered in my mind was how Fox News uses every black anchor, every woman, every Hispanic person they bring on the set. Like, you can't argue because, look, there they are. This is a conversation starter. I'm pretty sure it was this article that pointed out that Clarence Thomas, Candace Owens exist. They are not representative just because of skin color or, you know, where they were from. That has some to do with why they are the way they are, but it's not all encompassing. So yeah, this is definitely the way forward.
It's interesting how we can hear messaging and have our own takeaways from it, because I definitely get the listen part. But then my call to action was like, oh, no, it's absolutely white people's job to talk to other white people. Like, not to cut black people out of it, but like you as a white person actively practicing anti-racism, like you have an obligation to call it out where you see it. And let's be honest, white people say things to other white people that they would never say when BIPOC people are in the area. And like that absolutely has been my experience. So when I was reading this, I thought about how the Bernie versus Hillary race was. Again, this is my personal experience, but I had a lot of discussions with my friends who were astounded that I would not get behind Hillary Clinton, that I was going to vote for an old white dude once again.
Well, that was such a big conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I stayed to my politics, which is at the end of the day, it is the policies. It's the belief sets. It's that, you know, Bernie called out capitalism. He was for Medicare for all. There were so many policies that you could agree with that, no, I'm not going to vote for someone just based on identity. And like, there's no judgment necessarily behind that. I get that people were excited and enthused, but I do think that as leftists, like, you have to stay to the ideology. Like, being accused of identity politics, that's what triggers for me. Like, Hillary versus Bernie, it does feel like some people played identity politics and voted as such, even if the other candidate represented their actual beliefs and ideologies better.
Maurice also says later in the article, we infantilize members of historically marginalized or oppressed groups by seeking to placate or pander instead of being in a right relationship, which requires struggle, debate, disagreement, and hard work. This type of false solidarity is a form of charity that weakens the individual and the collective. Finding authentic alignment and solidarity among diverse voices is a serious labor. After all, steel sharpens steel. And that was tough for me to read a little bit because I was like, well, in what situations, you know, I guess I'm looking for a roadmap, or maybe it's not Maurice's intention to lay one out in this article, but it's that assumption. It's the same assumption that your friends had, Erin. Like, of course you're going to vote for the white woman who's running for president, right? Like, of course you are, because of your identity. And that if you actually have a conversation about the ideas instead of the identity, then your ideology and policy ideas can be sharpened and or expand, and you can learn something from someone else, or they can learn something from you. Like, there's more to discuss if you step away from just the identity. And I think Deon's right. A lot of people still need to just shut up and listen. Like, I see them all the time. I think what Maurice is saying is, like, as Deon said earlier, this is the path forward. But I mean, it's about being kind of humble and accepting you don't know everything, and you certainly don't know someone else's lived experience. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they are correct in what they support as policy, but it does mean that just in the humanity sense of it, just in the building coalition sense of it, you need to sit back and hear someone else's lived experience, understand why they believe what they believe, and what part of that is tied to their identity and lived experiences. Like, I think that makes sense. So it's a nuanced path. We love doing nuance here. That's what we do, you know?
It is definitely nuanced. And that quote you read was where I wanted to go next anyway, because it lays out this argument without framing majority populations. So like generally white people, but it could be other majority populations as the people being constrained, right? Like it does not frame it that way. Because I feel like probably those people who do need to sit quietly and listen more, they might hear the argument that, you know, people with more lived experience should be sort of centered in the conversation and that their own position should be relatively marginalized as like, now I'm being silenced and that's bad. The fact that I'm being silenced is bad. And this flips that to recognize that those being centered may not actually benefit as much as they may think from having their arguments centered and not questioned. Arguing that healthy debate is important to everyone because having your ideas challenged is what sharpens them, is what helps make corrections along the way so that you can be better off. And so recognizing that broadly is an important way to show that it's not about who's being wronged. It's about how can everyone go about this in the best way possible for themselves personally and their arguments and understanding and collectively as a group. And so, yeah, I appreciated that reframing because that puts everyone in a positive mindset. Hopefully it's like, okay, we're heading towards what's positive. There's not a conflict between, you know, deciding who's should be allowed to talk and how we go forward. The one thing I will say in response to Deon's comment that, you know, some people still need to kind of shut up is that this article was really written directed at professional organizations and how to manage internal organizations and debate. And so probably the vast majority of those people are self-selected. They are in the movement. They are not, you know, your random ignorant person on social media who will derail and potentially dominate a conversation with their ignorance. You know, that is not really who he's targeting with this discussion. And that's probably not who we're targeting with our discussion either. So we're sort of talking about all this along those lines.
But it's so important to make that distinction.
I would assume, especially being connected to the Working Families Party, that the Zoran campaign has taken this to heart, and we're watching the fruits of this discussion, because the way that he handles all these identity questions and just, you know, we were talking about him before re-recording, that it's a really solid message of, you know, helping people, helping all people, helping people where they are, helping people that may not agree with you. It's material focused, but embodied in this Ugandan born Muslim Indian man. It's a really, really well packaged setup that he's got going right now. And I think it's a good model going forward. Like, I don't want to, you know, put him on a pedestal, because Lord knows when we do that, those people are bound to disappoint. But this campaign seems to be a real model of the way this could work going forward nationally.
I've been thinking of this as also, like, in the way it was set up, my understanding was when we're talking about coalition building, a lot of the messaging, it felt like, was in reference to it being top down. Like, you're centering certain people and like that is how we should move forward as a movement. One, I think it's bullshit to expect people who are impacted by something to also be responsible for all the solutions. But secondly, what I was thinking is the approach of like true coalition building and how you change narratives is person to person. It's like those conversations that are happening at the lower level, you know, of just like neighbor to neighbor, if you will. And I think in those conversations, that's where identity doesn't matter as much. Like, those are conversations that you can have where you can respect the other person's experience. So, for example, in Georgia, we have a lot of Black voters who have been disenfranchised. So I know I've been in a lot of conversations about like voting isn't for me. Kind of, there's a reason why I don't vote, and that is because this is y'all's politics, essentially. And to me, like, that's something I can understand. Like, why wouldn't I understand that? Having the knowledge that I do, I completely understand, because it's true. There's an entire system that has been built to make someone feel like they're powerless, that their voice doesn't matter. But again, if you're having that conversation person to person and you're not getting it from social media or from some politician running, like, you can kind of address the feelings, but also challenge. If voting wasn't important, they wouldn't work so hard. There wouldn't be all this legislation, all these systems in place. And as soon as you say that, like, people are locked back in. People aren't dumb. They understand what's going on.
And continuing this conversation about Maurice Mitchell, he was able to add like a bit more flavor and nuance to his essay because he was interviewed by the New York Times. And so he was able to just, speak with the interviewer about some of these details. And the interviewer proposed this, like, this is the flip side of the bringing your identity to a debate discussion. And the interviewer sort of suggests why people deploy their identity while making their case. And it's not always just because it is good and valuable, but they say, quote, people talk about that or front load that because they want to be taken seriously, especially when in a group of perhaps white people. And there is a sense that they need to be listened to. And so therefore they front load their identity. And Maurice Mitchell responds, quote, well, what you just described, that dynamic, that's the story of my life as a Black man in this society. Being in rooms where there's white people who have a lot more power and where I have to come up with strategies to figure out how to be legitimate. And absolutely, one of those strategies for legitimizing yourself includes elevating your personal story. And there's ways that can be done in ways that I think are productive, but we run the risk of overcorrecting, end quote. And so continuing on the general topic of, well, okay, so should white people be silent or speak up? Mitchell continues saying, quote, I think it lets white people off the hook because they could somehow suggest they're performing some form of solidarity by remaining silent, when the most uncomfortable thing to do, if I was a white person in a debate around racial justice, is to stay in the debate and run the risk of being wrong, run the risk of offending somebody, but staying in the debate and staying in the relationship, end quote. And that is tricky. I mean, it totally depends on the people involved and the dynamics of the organization and the dynamics of the discussion. And, like 10 years ago, we would have absolutely like 100% bristled against that, I think. And my hope is that for all those people who went out and read White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist, that there's been enough education that more people, like vastly more people than 10 years ago, actually could do that. They could stay in the debate and, and maybe be wrong and be more okay with being wrong, or
Right.
be wrong without fundamentally derailing the discussion and crying and making everyone stop to take care of their feelings. Hopefully we're getting to a better place for these kinds of discussions.
Just in general, that is something we as a society need to work on. Being wrong is okay if you are trying to learn and move forward. Accepting that you don't know something is okay if you're trying to learn and move forward. It's okay to not know something. It's okay to ask questions. And it's okay to ask questions in the hope of learning and moving forward. That part's the key part of it, though. You have to be able to also accept that you were wrong and then accept the correction and move forward. We have a real culture of you have to pretend that you know what you're talking about all the time. You have to know everything all the time, when it's ridiculous, because like we've all discussed on this podcast, we know a little about everything. Like so many people know a lot about a little, and there are experts that know a lot about one subject. That doesn't mean you're an expert on everything. We have to be okay with having conversations, going into it knowing that you might have some blind spots.
I found myself being that annoying white person who just like calls out people's internal struggles. Like, oh, that sounds like you have this kind of attachment style. Or, but I mean, it is true that broken people like operate in our society, and it's really hard. Like, people do come from like families where they weren't able to be wrong. Like you weren't able to make a mistake and go to your parents, right?
Yeah.
The problem though is like we haven't built structures to heal any of these people. So then they show up in movements because like maybe their heart is in the right place, but again, any chance of being called out or, pushed back on, they kind of crumble under that weight. So I don't know what the solution is. Obviously therapy. But I'm like, what are our opportunities where you can just be put in a situation to be wrong, like more frequently?
Yeah.
Because I think people gravitate towards the things that they're good at and the things that they do know more about. So I don't know what kind of exposure therapy I'm proposing, but
Well, I do, because you're reminding me very clearly of a story I heard years ago now about education and like the cultural differences in education between the United States and other countries. So one of our favorite takeaway
Yeah.
lines is that American kids are, boy, I don't remember the number, but they're like 50th in math, or maybe not that bad, but definitely not in the top ranks on math proficiency, but number one in confidence.
Yeah. That's from Michael Moore's movie.
So number one, there's a huge disconnect there. But another detail that stuck in my head was about the ability to be wrong in school. And
Yeah.
I can't remember with which country the comparison was being made, but basically being wrong was encouraged, very explicitly encouraged in this other country because of everything we just said. Because of course you don't know. You're a kid and you're learning stuff. So you're trying to figure it out and you're going to be wrong. That's fine. Be wrong, be open about it, and we'll all learn together. And so like kids are willing to raise their hand and risk being wrong because there's no downside to it. There's no stigma attached to it. And you compare that to American kids who are terrified of being wrong and then don't want to raise their hand and engage. And so it's actually a double whammy. They don't learn the benefits of being wrong, which is at least as valuable as any concrete academics they're learning in school for their future life as an adult. And then they're less engaged and probably aren't learning as well because of their reluctance to engage. So that's the exposure therapy Americans need.
Well, and then like thinking about grading, there's actually a punitive part of being wrong. There aren't many progressive teachers who hand back your tests and like give you the opportunity to correct your things, to raise your grade up or, show your work and explain why this was wrong. And like we don't have a lot of transformative education. And that's unfortunate because you're right. Like that's very much one of the ways that I'm sure that starts.
So I'm going to shift it a little bit. The other interpretation I got from this interview and what Maurice Mitchell is trying to say was also how to make your argument more effective. And maybe they didn't intend this, but I thought it was interesting that it could also be used this way. So, trying to use an example that's personal that I know well. And so I'm going to, try to put this theory to work in the moment. I have conversations with people where we start talking about healthcare in the United States and they might say it's not that bad, or maybe repeat some fear mongering talking points about socialized medicine or something. And I usually interject with, well, I have a rare disease. I'm a rare disease patient, or, something like that. Right. And I use that as shorthand primarily, especially when we're just having a quick conversation and there isn't time to get into all the details. But I also rely on that to be like, it's shorthand for I have experience in this system. I have probably seen more than you. You should take my you should take my word more seriously or something, right? And I think that after reading Maurice Mitchell's take about how we're talking to each other, I'm thinking to myself that it's not enough to say, as a rare disease patient, I want Medicare for all. That is not enough. In fact, that's probably shortchanging the conversation entirely. It's probably much more effective to tell the story of like the father I saw in the waiting room fighting with insurance company for the fourth time that week to get his port put in so he could start chemo for his cancer. And it's probably better to share that, like, my health insurance company denied me for over a month when I was already approved to get a drug via compassionate use by all the other entities. Like those stories are probably going to hit more than just, I'm a rare disease patient, so trust me. And I think what it allows for is for someone you're talking to relate to the emotion of being in that position and being like, yeah, I've been in that position before too. Whether it's in that exact position or someone I know, or they can compare it to something else in their life. And that might hit harder, right? And so, like, my experiences give my perspective more weight in a debate. And at the end of the day, like, the reasons I want Medicare for all are not because I'm a rare disease patient. That has nothing to do with it. It's because I've seen the system break down at every level, like for myself and others. And I understand it's not functioning for millions of people, let alone rare disease patients. So my identity has just allowed me to have more experiences than most. My personal experiences have informed my opinion, but my identity as a rare disease patient really isn't the most important part at the end of the day. And especially when I'm trying to convince someone of something that, especially that we need socialized medicine in the United States, which is like a big conversation to have, right? And that so many people are so jaded against that. So, what we have in common is the system. And so talking about the experiences with the system is where we can actually relate. And I can totally imagine someone, if I start with, well, I'm a rare disease patient, I want Medicare for all, someone saying like, well, as a rare disease patient, yeah, she just wants us all to pay for her bad luck. Like, of course. So if I front load that identity, I'm already down a peg in that conversation. If I talk about my direct experiences and the things I've witnessed from others, and they can maybe relate to that feeling, I am in a much better position to have a conversation about moving things in that direction, right? So when Maurice says it's how you employ it that matters, that is how I could use that in other ways that I thought was, maybe interesting and more effective.
I don't know why, but when you were saying that, I just thought of like Rudy Giuliani going, "I'm a lawyer, trust me."
He's over deploying his identity. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
get it.
Oh boy.
And just the other thing to highlight, to like re-up something that was said in one of his quotes, was about overcorrecting.
Mhm.
That is so often an element that needs to be discussed. Things are bad in one direction, so let's go all the way in the other direction. It just turns out that's almost never the answer. Black people are being completely ignored in political debates. Their voices should be centered. Great. You can take it too far. That's all he's saying. You can overcorrect and lean on identity too much. And it just means, like, right, the correct path is the middle path, as is so often the case.
I was thinking of like in the gay community, like there is something that has been coming up a lot to distinguish certain things. And like that is the difference between being gay and being queer.
Mm.
Queer is a political identity. Like it has its base in the movement. There are plenty of gay people that I disagree with that I don't think would lead to, a better life for everyone, including the queer community. But people using their identity as a gay person has absolutely elevated certain debates above others that don't necessarily fall into politics that are in alignment with making our society more free, fair, just. I think it's tricky, but I like the nuance we're adding.
A good time to reiterate that this is for people who are already deeply involved in this and already many steps past. You should just shut up and listen, I guess, because broadly in society, Black people are nowhere near being overcorrecting in the centrality of discussion. So in these kind of left movements, keep that in mind.
Yeah, and it depends on the topic too. Like there's a lot of times where it makes sense to just listen for a long time and understand that
I
you do
feel that
not
way
get
with
it.
I'm
So I
gonna
guess we're
interrupt you to make a point about listening to women. Jesus Christ.
awesome.
That was an internet interruption, not a intentional. Hey Amanda, you should continue what you were saying, and I'll listen.
I don't remember.
Now, to wrap up, we're going to try to see this story through a lot of the lenses we've been discussing. Race is involved, political action, differentiating between debate and real progress. And Amanda and I, we had a experience coming across this news story from different angles and experiencing it in exactly the opposite directions that the differences in media sort of would lead people to. So this is from the New Republic. It's titled American Politics Only Pretends to Work, but they focus on this story about Maryland Governor Wes Moore and what he did recently. So on May 16th, it says Governor Wes Moore, a Democrat, a Rhodes Scholar, and the only Black governor in the country, sent a letter to the president of the Maryland State Senate vetoing a bill passed by the state legislature that would have created a reparations commission to study the economic and social case for compensating Black Marylanders for the enduring harms of slavery and its legacy. The headlines suggested betrayal. Quote, Maryland governor vetoes reparations bill, read the New York Times headline. Governor Moore vetoes bill creating a state commission to study reparations, wrote the Baltimore Banner. But the governor's letter tells a more nuanced story. Quoting from the letter, it says, quote, I strongly believe now is not the time for another study. Now is the time for continued action that delivers results for the people we serve. And continuing the article, quote, the bill that Moore spiked was never actually about discovering new facts to lay alongside the vast mountain of already obtained knowledge. Rather, it's a quintessentially American ritual, a performance of forward motion that in reality preserves the status quo, activity masquerading as achievement. We are not waiting for more data. We are waiting for the willpower of political elites to catch up to the facts we have already gathered about the state of the world. And this gets so deeply to what we sort of argue as the difference between the progressive left, the socialist left, and the sort of the liberal left that says they believe in things, but sort of conduct themselves in such a way that they want to do as much good as possible without challenging any existing power structures. And the way that often reveals itself is through, let's do another study. Let's have another commission. We're taking this super seriously. Let's look into that. And, justice delayed is justice denied, and delay is what this sort of tactic definitely results in. Like, definitely. I mean, saying let's think about it is by definition delaying action. And their argument is we'll be able to take action better later if we've thought about it for a while, but then later comes and action rarely does.
The best headline I saw about this was Maryland Governor Wes Moore vetoes slavery reparations study, citing need for, quote, the work itself. And that was the AP. That's how you write a headline. Just throwing that out there.
Behind the scenes, the AP article is the article that I saw about it.
Oh, there you go. I did not. I only saw the Times and I was like, what?
So then retroactively, I had that reaction where it was like, I guess I was already tuned into it. So then when I saw that, I was like, oof, those are bad headlines.
Mm-hmm.
I want to use an example, and I want to make an enemy because we need, to make better enemies. As far as
I did say that last time, yeah.
Yeah, doing something and talking about something. Everybody remember Cory Booker's record-breaking filibuster where he just got up and he yapped about, some stuff, some important stuff. He said a lot of things, but he wasn't filibustering a bill. He was just talking. And now that the Senate has just passed this atrocious, probably one of the worst bills that have ever passed through Congress, and it's now, as we're talking, I think hasn't been approved by the House, but in the Senate, who didn't filibuster it? Cory Booker. He didn't do anything.
Yep.
He didn't do the work. Like, the time for talking in this case literally was when they were trying to stop this bill, but he didn't do that. So that's the exact thing that I think Jay was talking about with the idea of comporting yourself in a way that you're actually doing something. But when it comes down to it, you kind of just want to leave things the way they are. And I think Cory Booker is like the perfect example of that.
But he did break famous white supremacist Strom Thurmond's filibuster record, which I think now means that white supremacy is illegal.
Yeah, and the bill's names changed too. So, with Chuck Schumer and Cory Booker as allies, maybe we don't have any friends.
Yeah. On that note, I just was reading how Hakeem Jeffries spoke, I guess, for more than 6 hours on the House floor in response to this legislation, but the media reported it as there's words behind the scenes that he's trying to break the record. And I'm like,
Yeah,
nobody cares about the
that's
record. That's not the
so
point. Like, stop talking about that. That's not like we are about to lose everything. Please talk about what we're about to lose and how
Yeah.
it's everything. Jesus.
I mean, but if they did break the record, this would be a bill
Absolutely.
to break the record on. Like, just say it.
Sure, this is a better time. I just don't want to hear about that right
No,
now.
I completely agree. The framing of it, the
Yeah.
elevating of it, yeah.
I mean, in this article about Wes Moore and how this whole thing was, misinterpreted, they mentioned Joan Didion writing in 1992 that political apathy was a misdiagnosis. The real condition was disenchantment, a loss of faith that the system could never deliver anything meaningful. And while raw turnout numbers have rebounded from the dismal 1990s, it remains the case that disaffection is a constant presence. And Erin just mentioned it earlier, talking to people who are like, why would I vote? The system is not going to work for me. I mean, the problem is inaction. The problem has been inaction. And then while we are not active, we're getting all of the very few nice things that we have stripped away, taken down, destroyed. So, I mean, I was thrilled to see that this is why Wes Moore is saying this. I do have questions about his future political goals and motivations because it's very clear that he is on a path to run for president. What does he want to have on his record is one of the things that definitely is a factor. We can't not say that. But if he then takes a step that actually helps these communities, okay. If you take action, if you help those communities, whether with infrastructure, school, free education, like whatever it might be, okay, then you can veto the bill about reparations because you're interested in action.
Yeah, so just the last quick line from this article that I want to give credit to the writer for saying it, because if they didn't, I would have. We should think of Governor Moore's veto like this. He didn't reject reparations. He rejected this whole charade. And that sums up so much of our politics right now. And, you know, calling it out and differentiating between the charade and the action that should be taken. It's not just denigrating performative nonsense. It's also pointing in the direction we actually need to go, which is what we're trying to do now. Like, yeah, if you're going to filibuster something, fine. It's going to be a performance. Like, by definition, that is what filibustering is, but at least do it at a consequential moment.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that people can do in politics that are, somewhat performative, but have the chance of having concrete impacts. But that is not really what we're seeing in our politics right now. And so, like, collectively, everything we're talking about today, like, this is the structural understanding we need to take into our debates and our strategizing. Like, it's understanding the forces arrayed against us, understanding that they are happy to use time as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
I came up with this sort of understanding of 4D chess many years ago because people talk about 4D chess in politics a lot, right? They're like, oh, that politician's so good or smart. They're playing 4D chess. It seems like they're doing one thing, but they're actually doing another. And I thought about that and I was like, sure, I get what you mean. But if you like take it a little bit literally and you think of the fourth dimension, that usually is referred to as time. I was like, Mitch McConnell, the famous obstructionist leader of the Republicans in the Senate, he was playing 4D chess. And the way he played it was by delaying. That's how Merrick Garland ended up not getting on the Supreme Court. Not because McConnell came up with this brilliant strategic move. He just delayed. He just ran out the clock. And that is what happens in politics. If we are not making forward progress, we are being delayed. And for the forces in power, that's good enough for them. They're happy to delay the fight until later. And if we need to have the fight later, fine. And if we can figure out another way to delay later, all the better. So they're particularly happy for the left to delay itself through unproductive infighting, Not to be confused with constructive criticism that does try to move us forward, but like the left has many principles. One of the most prominent needs to be about the need to push forward, to take concrete action that materially moves politics forward. So our actions need to be aligned with concrete progress, which means following some of those guidelines for movement building that we started the show with, embracing imperfect allies and alliances, understanding that collective organized action wins, not ideologically pure individuals, and to use every tool available to us to take power where we can, because our opponents certainly will. So I think that's what we accomplished today. Any final thoughts?
My final thoughts are watch Andor season 2. Like I'm serious. if you want to know about coalition building, the difficulty of moving forward, making progress, and kind of a revolutionary mode that we might find ourselves in right now, in like a real major things have to change kind of way, watch Andor season 2. And to spoil a 10-year-old movie, the main character dies in Rogue One, but he dies for a cause. In this season 2, he is told by someone, not much of a revolutionary, are you? Because he's trying to be strategic and trying to do things in a way that pushes things forward. So progress is hard. People that are on your side will not agree with you. It's difficult in a lot of ways to herd us cats that have many different ideas and want to do different things in one direction. But just keep the
eye on the prize.
Yeah, that's the best way to say it. Keep the eye on the prize. Keep in mind where we're going, why we're going there, and who we're actually doing it for. Because right now, we're not actually doing it for ourselves. We're doing it for the future. So it's in line with that 4D chess movement. Like, none of this is going to get better significantly in most of our lifetimes. This is for the future.
And politicians aren't going to save us, so stay engaged. Continue pushing.
Except for Cory Booker. He'll save us.
Oh, Deon.
Sorry, I'm enemy making. I'm doing it.
We did advocate for this in the last show. It's literally about making enemies. That's what we said.
We are big advocates of making enemies. Deon, you brought it up earlier, and I was just about to say, the one exception is Disney, apparently, because Disney made Andor possible, and maybe Disney will save us.
Oh
that's
my
my takeaway.
The right thinks they're an enemy, so
we're in alliance. We're in an uneasy
like
alliance,
a rebel alliance.
Yeah. Oh,
Star Wars. What's up, nerds?
See what you did there.
If you'd like to join our alliance, you can leave us a message or voicemail at 202-999-3991. Send an email to j@bestofleft.com or reach out to us on Signal at bestofleft.01. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is all really happening. So continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.